Now, when you think of stories involving typeface, you know, the way that words are printed on page, and bookbinding, you might not immediately conjure up an image of a man setting out under cover of darkness to drop some of his most beloved life's work into the river. But that is exactly what happened in the history of the Doves Press. It was founded by two men who were both friends of William Morris. And William Morris was the father of the arts and crafts movement, a revival of interest in all things handcrafted, things that are beautiful as well as functional. And that was in the latter half of the 1800s, began in England. The Doves Press produced some beautiful books in the few years it existed, and had a most dramatic postscript after it ran into financial problems. Spencer Stewart is our books expert, and he's here to tell the story of Doves Press and its two founders.
Cobden-Sanderson and Emery Walker are aware of one another, and they're certainly moving in the same circles. In 1899, you see them make moves to begin a press, which ultimately becomes Doves Press, with the commission of a particular type that they're going to design for the books that they're going to be making, which ultimately becomes Doves type. The process with that was that they enlisted the help of Percy Tiffin, who is a drawer-illustrator. He was able to study some of the specimens of the 15th century typographer Nicholas Jensen and transferred those images over to the punch cutter by the name of Edward Prince. And that's how you see Doves type as it is today. They put it together and then they were off to the races, as it were. A lot of typographers often say that the golden type, Morris's type, which is an attempt also to kind of go back to this kind of Renaissance typeface, it's not as pared down and simple and directly to the source that you see in the Doves type. There's something very clean about it.
Do you agree?
Yeah. On the page, there's a kind of air, there's a lightness to it. So in 1900, they established themselves as a printing press. And in 1902, you see Paradise Lost, an adaptation of Paradise Lost by John Milton, which is, certainly gets them a bunch of subscribers of people who are starting to collect what's known as private press books. And then, of course, probably their most well-known is the project begun in 1903 and completed in 1905 of the English Bible.
Huh.
Famously with the first page that says, "In the beginning," with an I for in, that extends the length of the text block in red.
Whoa,
and
that sounds beautiful.
It's absolutely gorgeous. And I invite anyone to sort of search, Doves Press English Bible, and you'll find this page. It's absolutely iconic. That becomes really the characteristic of it. It is, in some ways, the type is really what kind of made Doves Press. Unfortunately, the relationship between Cobden-Sanderson and Emery Walker was the one that was somewhat spotty. The wheels start to come off, and a lot of the discussion about this, what went wrong, the kind of retrospective look at it, is that Cobden-Sanderson was, by all accounts, he was obsessive. The idea of putting together a book for him meant a great deal. And certainly when you see a Doves Press book, it's as an object, it's very striking immediately. The way it's built, it's just gorgeous. Not to say that Emery Walker wasn't interested, but he had a lot of other things going on. In terms of his interest, his typography was really, that was his skill, certainly. Emery Walker's taking on more projects. Cobden-Sanderson's going more and more into the Doves Press, and then there starts to become a bit of a friction there. And ultimately, their relationship sort of dissolves at that point. Subscription numbers go down, and what ends up happening is about 1908, there are issues financially with Doves Press. And what you start to see in 1909 is Cobden-Sanderson making moves to try and have full control over the typeface. At this point in time, Emery Walker issues a writ to receive 50% of the assets of Doves Press, which is, i.e., read the typeface, basically. That's really all they've got. Everything else is probably on loan or on commission or it's on credit.
Right.
Paper, certainly. And so what happens is a man by the name of Sidney Cockrell, who was a collector and curator, museum curator, sort of steps in, negotiates a deal between the two of them. in which Cobden-Sanderson has rights to the typeface until his death, at which point it's handed over to Emery Walker. Emery Walker is 10 years younger than Cobden-Sanderson, so he has a little bit more time, and certainly at that time it seems like Cobden-Sanderson's health wasn't too good. So that's settled, but then the plot thickens and it gets somewhat strange. Good Friday 1913, in Cobden-Sanderson's journals, it's reported that he goes to Hammersmith Bridge and he throws the matrices into the Thames River.
All of the typeface masters?
That's right. So these are the molds that one puts this sort of alloy into in order to make the punches.
Huh.
It's a massive, that's most of the work is making the matrices, and it's really the gold. It's truly the asset.
And he just threw them off the bridge.
He threw them in. He bequeathed them to the river or something like this.
And he made a little note of that, too.
Yeah, yes, he did. And he continued this. It should be noted he was in his 70s at this point, and was, in terms of his health, he was not doing well.
I have this picture of this perhaps frail man heading up to the bridge with, handfuls of these things.
At night.
At night.
At night. Yeah, and he's living at that point at 15 Upper Mall, which if you look at on the map of where in relation to Hammersmith Bridge, he just sort of has to walk along the river and hang a right, and then he's there. To just sort of drop it in, because
sounds like part of a Dickens novel.
Absolutely,
doesn't it?
it's a real mystery, right? And there is an obsession to it, right? It's this continuation of him being so drawn to his product that there's no way that anyone else is going to make a book using this typeface. And what happens is he actually continues this, though. He continues to kind of discard any remnants of this typeface between August 1916. And January of 1917, when he's really in the throes of his poor health, he would go down, they estimate about 170 times during that period, and dump roughly 12 pounds of punches into the river.
Oh, my soul.
Yeah. And so he, by the point that he dies in 1922, just before then, it sort of revealed that there's no more typeface. And of course, the news of this for Emery Walker, who was in a little bit of a different financial situation than Cobden-Sanderson, it was pretty devastating. So much so that Anne Cobden-Sanderson actually provides him with some financial compensation for this act.
For the loss. Huh.
That's right. And so Emery Walker goes on to do a lot of things. He actually eventually dies in 1933. But, he's actually one of the reasons why there are so many wonderful houses that have been preserved in London. He was a huge advocate for restoration and the protection of historically important buildings.
Thank you, Emery.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what happens is the trail runs kind of dry. But then in 2013, there's a gentleman by the name of Robert Greene, who's a typographer, and he's obsessed with Dove's type. He starts to sort of study it, and he makes a digital reproduction of it by going and visiting as many different copies of Dove's Press books as he can. And during this period, starts to go into, as you imagine, the story itself, starts to read the journal, and actually starts to somewhat get a sense of maybe where the punches were being dropped into the Thames. And so in 2015, he, with low tide taking place, actually started to sift through and found a couple of punches.
No kidding.
Yeah, and he then returned and found more, and then enlisted the help of the Port Authority, and they had divers, and they brought up 150 punches.
Wow.
So they were still remaining on the Thames riverbed, which is remarkable because the Hammersmith Bridge itself is its own witness to history. It had been subject to an IRA bombing in the 90s and another attempted one that was actually a failure, but ultimately led with some structural damage. So they had to actually reconcrete certain areas. So that would have definitely compromised the search. But what happened is he found these 150 punches. He was able to kind of nuance his 2013 iteration, which we refer to as DOVES. And now we have a digital copy of the original press.
What a thing.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Archaeology and typography coming together.
An
right?
obsession across the board. Everyone is obsessed with this. Robert Greene talks about sort of being pleased that this whole project was finished because he sort of alludes to the fact that his marriage was sort of falling apart because he was sort of obsessing over this so much. But many thanks to his effort, certainly.
Yes, my goodness.
And you can actually online there are links to his type, and it's gorgeous. It's such a refreshing thing to look at.
Thank you, Spencer.
Well, thank you for having me.